2011, the heavy rains that continued over several months caused a flood that engulfed Thailand. There were over 800 deaths. Economic losses were estimated by the World Bank at $45.7 billion. In the American West, the number of large-scale forest fires have grown by 4 times over 30 years, burning over 6.5 times more territory. In Australia during 2006, rainfall dropped to less than 60% of the average in large regions of the southeast. The drought caused extensive damage to crops. According to the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, a possible cause of this abnormal weather is reported to be the greenhouse gases caused by human activity. If global warming continues at this pace, the northern polar ice caps may be lost during this century. This is a threat not only to human life, but also to species survival. The United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development was held in 2012 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. What became known as Rio+20 was attended by 50,000 people from 120 countries. However, opinions differed between nations, and no concrete plans could be made. During the summit, one announcement caused a stir.
Blue Planet Prize winner.
The Blue Planet Prize. This prize, respected worldwide, is awarded to individuals or organizations that have greatly contributed to solving the world's environmental problems. One of this year's recipients was Dr. Thomas Lovejoy. His biodiversity research has made a great impact on protecting the Earth's environment.
Deeply honored I am.
The other recipients were Professor William Rees and Dr. Mathis Wackernagel for their development of the Index of Human Dependence on the Natural Environment, the Ecological Footprint.
Plus years working in the area.
Since the prize's establishment 21 years ago in 1992, 2 awards are given annually along with a trophy and 50 million yen, or about $600,000, earning the nickname of the Environmental Nobel Prize. Other winners include Mr. Lester Brown and Dr. Jane Lubchenco. The Planet Under Pressure International Summit was held in London ahead of Rio+20.
Speech at this very important
The winner of the 2010 Blue Planet Prize, Dr. Robert Watson, made an announcement. The Imperative to Act, a proposal by 14 of the Blue Planet Prize winners, calling for drastic changes and solutions for environmental issues, economic development, and poverty.
We're already seeing species extinctions 100 to 1,000 times the normal evolutionary rate. The difference is this one's caused by human activity, us. If we are to achieve our dream, the time to act is now.
In order to protect Mother Earth, the Blue Planet Prize winners are using their influence to make a stand. This program is made possible by the Asahi Glass Foundation. We went to Washington, D.C. for an interview. The man who announced the imperative to act at Rio+20, Dr. Robert Watson. Dr. Watson is a pioneer in the environmental protection of the ozone layer. He has played a role in the international acceptance of climate change outlines and the Kyoto Protocol, and has even won the Nobel Peace Prize for his organization's work. In recognition of his accomplishments, He was awarded the 19th Annual Blue Planet Prize in 2010.
The environment is still degrading. Climate is changing, we're losing biodiversity, and it's threatening food, water, energy security for the poorest people on our planet. The international framework is clearly not working because the governments of the world have not agreed to reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases. The large countries such as the United States, the large emerging economies such as India and China, all need to change the way we produce and use energy.
Centered around Dr. Watson, the imperative to act contains 12 key messages, calling for drastic changes in technology and economics. It promotes local cooperation as well as grassroots movements to build a sustainable society, reminding us to remember that we ourselves are a part of nature.
The way we sometimes measure it with gross domestic product is not a very good measure. It does measure economic activity, but it doesn't measure sustainable economic activity, where we need to bring in what we call the various forms of capital. Built capital, the capital we produce, I can say that better, human capital, natural capital and social capital. So we need to transform the way we think, and we need to think about the economy. That was one of the big things we brought out of the Blue Planet paper. For the world to be successful, we need a strong economy and a clean environment. There is actually no dichotomy between economic growth and environmental sustainability. We have to learn to bring them together. By transitioning to a low carbon economy, we can actually have economic growth and we can protect the Earth's climate system. By changing the way we produce our agricultural goods, we can again have the food we need without destroying the environment. So it's not a choice of the environment or the economy. We've got to learn to have economic growth consistent with a clean environment. So what we need is everybody to recognise we have a serious problem, but we can address that problem by working together.
There are those who have answered Dr. Watson's call to action in Japan as well. Environmental journalist Junko Edahiro is one. Edahiro has translated many works, including Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth and Lester Brown's World on the Edge.
Changing the world for better may be a huge challenge, but we should not give up. As Dr. Watson pointed out, there are things we can do. In 2012, the Blue Planet Award was again awarded to prominent people in their field. Let's take a look at their activities and achievement. Maybe they can inspire us about what we ourselves can do for the Earth.
In 2012, the Blue Planet Prize ceremony was held in Tokyo. What kind of action are these three men taking to protect the environment?
Hello.
Edahiro's first interview was with Dr. Lovejoy.
My name is Junko Edahiro.
Dr. Lovejoy began his research in the Amazon during the 1960s and made pioneering achievements in the field of biodiversity before the term existed.
I'd like to start with the question about the origin of your research and the project. When did you start and how did you start your project on biodiversity?
So I was working for the World Wildlife Fund United States at a time that there was a big controversy in science as to how big a national park should be. And I realized that our projects might or might not succeed depending on the answer to that question. So I worried about it and I worried about it. And then one day I had the idea that I could do a giant experiment and get the answer.
Beginning in 1979, he began the greatest landscape experiment in history, proving that seeds could be far better sustained in well-maintained preserves. He says that it is biodiversity that creates a richer ecosystem.
Thinking about, how wild insects actually pollinate crops and value that. So there once was an estimate that in New York State, the number of commercial fruit tree flowers that were pollinated every year was 3 trillion pollinations, right?
Wow.
Nobody put a dollar number on it, but you can't get there and do it with a little paintbrush, right?
Yeah. So all of them are done by bees.
That's right.
Right.
Different kinds of pollinators.
I think it is very important for people to see invisible links. In the forest, they can see rows and the trees, but it must be very difficult for people to see the invisible links between the two or too many parts of the forest.
So I can talk about it publicly. I can write about it publicly. I can talk to policymakers, and there's a reasonable amount of attention, but nothing works like taking them to see the forest and to listen to it, and to spend the night in the forest listening to all the biological diversity. And it's like it just opened their eyes, right?
Dr. Lovejoy has taken several hundred people into forests, including former U.S. Vice President Al Gore and many other policymakers.
There's one very neglected kind of ecosystem service, which I call knowledge services.
Knowledge.
Which is, if you really think about it, biological diversity is an enormous living library on how biology can work. And that's very important to us, right?
Right.
And so we tend to treat all those discoveries as free, but they make a huge difference.
The ecosystems that Dr. Lovejoy describes have greatly benefited the human race in many ways. This is Iriomote Island in southern Japan. About 90% of its surface is covered with subtropical virgin forest and has been declared a national park. Spreading out from the mouth of the river are the largest remaining mangroves in Japan. A mangrove is a rare tree that only grows in places where fresh and seawater mix. Native to tropical and subtropical regions, over 100 types of plants worldwide are classified as mangroves. They are known for their distinctive roots.
だから普通の植物だと絶対こういうところに生えてこれないのよね。だけどもこういうところに生えてるってこと自体すごく面白いことじゃないですか。
Dr. Shigeyuki Baba, who studies Iriomote Island and other mangroves all over the world, is our guide. If you look at the base of the mangroves,
ボラかな？そこから中にいる。
mangrove forests are home to many different creatures. They are known as the cradle of marine life. During low tide, the mangroves are bare to the land. Even there, many kinds of life can be found.
これさ、こうやってさ、葉っぱ食べてるじゃないですか。これ、食事中。
Beneath the mangrove trees are mollusks known as mangrove whelk. They gather to feed on the fallen leaves.
マングローブの葉っぱが落ちてこれらが食べてでそれの排泄物が栄養分になる。潮が引いてきて
Here near the water, another creature can be found.
ほらここにこれ全部ミナミコメツキガニほらまっすぐ歩くカニですよね落ちるとくるくるっと回って潜っちゃうでしょくるくるくるくるくる
The leaves shed by the mangroves are broken down by microorganisms in the ocean and feed the plankton. The crabs have come to feast on the rich plankton within the soil.
これだけの数を養うだけ土に栄養分があるということですよね。
After the crabs feed, they till the soil's surface.
カニが耕してくれてる。で耕してくれるから空気が入ると。で空気が入ると根って呼吸してますから木の根ってのは。だからそれにとってはすごくいいことでしょ。だから持ちつ持たれつ栄養を供給してくれてる。でここは高温して空気がたくさん入るようにしてくれてると。うまくできてます。だから生態系なんじゃないですか。
The mangroves play a vital role, even to the human race.
これがないとするとね、まっすぐ後ろに波が当たるわけじゃないですか。そうすると土壌がね侵食されるということだから、これがあることで要するにその内陸のその侵食を守ってくれてる。でなおかつ空中っての波が砕けた空中の塩分が多いですよね、こういうところだと。そうするとそれつもこの葉っぱが取ってくれてるんで、そういう意味でもあった方がいい。だから単なるそのコンクリートの護岸堤よりも、こういうやつをきちんとその守り育てることの方がすごくその防災的にね、災害から守るということからするとすごくいいことだと思います。
Research shows that the services the Earth's ecosystem provides would calculate to about $33 trillion a year, or close to double the entire world's GDP in 1997. All over the world, research and tree planting is taking place to protect mangroves. Another Blue Planet Prize winner, Dr. Gordon Sato, has developed mangrove planting techniques in Eritrea, Africa. He is working to establish a sustainable society in the poorest regions by raising livestock on mangroves. There are also new tools to help protect the environment. Edahiro is about to interview the other winners of this year's Blue Planet Prize.
Hello.
Hello, how do you do?
Welcome. My name is Junko Edahiro. Nice to
Professor William Rees and Dr. Mathis Wackernagel.
Very nice to meet you.
These two men invented the Ecological Footprint, an index that establishes the concept of how dependent mankind is on natural environments through complex calculations. As of today, we need 1.5 more Earths to provide the resources to accommodate our consumption. If population and consumption continue to rise as they are, we will need 2 Earths by the year 2030. However, ours is the only Earth we have. Many countries have exceeded their biocapacity in the last 50 years.
I'd like to start with the question of the origin of the ecological footprint. How did you come up with the idea of that?
It's a very long story.
Yes.
Look, the origin really goes back to a time when I was a farm boy. I grew up partly in southern Ontario on my grandparents' farm. And one day I was sitting at a huge table laden with food, and I realized everything on that table I had helped to grow. I was with many cousins, a cheap farm labor. And it struck me then that I was deeply connected to the earth. So that was the first insight that made me become a human ecologist.
Professor Rees's childhood was spent surrounded by nature. After graduating college, he taught at the University of British Columbia while continuing on his research on human carrying capacity.
We turned the ratio over. Instead of asking how many people can this area support, the question becomes how much area is needed to support these people.
Right.
I mean, it's similar as a child, because, and I think that's the strange thing about our work, that what we talk about is obvious to children, but not so much to adults. And so I asked my grandfather, so how will it work? I mean, we're using more and more fossil fuel. How will that work when I'm getting older? And he said, oh, we always have 40 years worth of fossil fuel. Don't worry, son. And in 1973, there was this oil crisis.
Yes.
I was just 11 years old. And Switzerland's response to the oil crisis was to say, let's have 3 car-free Sundays. Not that it saved much fossil fuel, but for us children, it was an amazing experience of realizing the world could be very different. So from a naive view of a child living in a world without cars for a day, it was brilliant. It said, wow, there will be a totally new future and it will be a great future. So we as naive children, I think, had a very positive relationship to the possibility that the world could change quite dramatically in our lifetime.
Dr. Wackernagel and Professor Rees met in 1989. Under Rees's direction, Dr. Wackernagel succeeded in calculating ecological footprints and began the Global Footprint Network (NPO). Today, 12 countries, including Japan, and over 100 cities and regions have adopted the ecological footprint, which is greatly contributing to the risk analysis of overconsumption.
Over there, oh, here. This is called computer.
In addition, their website lets anyone easily calculate their own footprint.
The way you eat obviously determines what kind of shops there will be, how are things transported. So you can choose your whole lifestyle. And so you can go through your life, and at the end, it will tell you if everybody lives like you. How many planets would we need? And then you can compare with how many we have. You look around, say, how many do we have? Say, I think it's 1. Then you can calculate the ratio.
So what can we do as individual or at the community level or national level to reduce our ecological footprint so that we can come back to the sustainable path?
Well, obviously, some people can significantly change their lifestyle. I've been a bicycle commuter all my life, for example.
That's why you look so healthy and young.
Yes.
Not just look, continues to
Well,
be.
it's part of my being a child still. I still ride my bike. But you see, there have been a number of studies now to show that if individuals did all the things that they could do as individuals, it wouldn't make that much difference, maybe 10%. Sustainability and the kinds of problems we're talking about are collective problems. They require collective solutions. So we're all in this ship together. There's no point in pretending that the first-class cabins aren't going to sink if the whole ship sinks. So that if I'm a citizen of a city like Vancouver, and I'm told you've got to drive your car less for the environment, I'm not going to do that if I don't have a transit system. But the transit system has to be provided by government on behalf of the common good. It's a collective problem requiring collective solutions. So if we need carbon taxes, if we need better transit systems, if we need better pricing of the goods and materials that we use, that's a very important point. So let's use those tools and recognize that working as individuals can contribute, but this is really something that is a national project and a global project. And we need the global agreements so that industries and nations aren't put at disadvantages in the marketplace. Many countries today refuse to do anything. My own, for example, won't stop developing oil and gas, for example, because it's under pressure from other countries. And if we do this, then we're at a competitive disadvantage. So we need to have a level playing field in which all nations are forced to play by the same rules.
I'm actually thrilled to see we're now more and more engaging also with finance ministries, because they think about accounting. Where, for example, I was in Colombia, And they said, biocapacity will be the currency of the 21st century. And he said, absolutely. He could see that the big pressure on Colombia, the cost for people is rising, so inflation is rising mainly because of food and energy costs going up. Yeah. At the end of the conversation, he said something very interesting, because we measure biocapacity in hectares, global average hectares. We call them global hectares. And he said, global hectares, that's the only currency that is backed up by reality. So a central banker starting to recognize that biocapacity ultimately is our strongest currency on which we need to depend and from which we need to think about. Now, if that's the case, what's truly in our self-interest gives me a lot of hope and possibility of saying, wow, we can probably infect those minds of reconsidering what before seemed to be a threat to them. Yeah. And they can see, wow, yeah, this is how we need to think about it in order to secure our well-being.
How do you see the world in the future with the contribution of ecological footprint concept? How do you see the future?
I mean, we have dramatic choices, and the future is not destiny. We can choose. And I think what we try to contribute is help people make choices that are aligned with what they want to achieve. So anything is possible, and that's why living is so exciting.
You know, human beings are different from any other species. We have high intelligence, that's the capacity to reason from the data. We have the capacity to plan ahead. So what we're doing here is providing the data needed for planning ahead so that people using their intelligence can apply it to this whole sustainability issue.
Thank you very much.
It's time for us to wake up to a brighter future, full of possibilities.
Many people have been offering concepts and tools to protect Mother Earth. We can learn and use these concepts and tools so that we can leave this beautiful blue planet to generations yet to come.
The world needs to act now.
Let's recognize that we depend on a living planet.
Living with mangroves.
Use your intelligence, understand the data, and act accordingly. Everything is possible if you do that.
It's the most exciting time to be alive, and you can make a big difference.
This program was made possible by the Asahi Glass Foundation.